Funding definitely is important. Something that is very much related to funding, but I think is the overall issue when I met with the many teachers that were there at the Capitol during the walkout is we've got to lower classroom sizes for education outcomes to improve. But some of the low-hanging fruit, as I like to call it, some of the reforms that we can address immediately are some of the assessments that are used at the kindergarten level. I've got Sapulpa, Kiefer, Mounds, Leonard, Bixby, Glenpool in my district, Lone Star as well. And not all of those schools use the same assessment at that kindergarten level. And so when children transfer, that teacher that receives that incoming student has to devote a lot of extra time to reassess that child. And at the kindergarten age, you're teaching things like numbers and letters and how to spell your name. And some kids, of course, are advanced. Some are much behind the curve. And so to free up any time there in those early years is very important. Another thing that I think that we can do is the RSA reform that we passed this year. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that. That's the Reading Sufficiency Act at the third grade level. That makes, it just frees up, again, more time in the teachers. It puts less stress on the students, running out of time. But some of the testing, too. I think we spend too much time focused on that testing and not enough on creativity and learning. So those are some reforms that I think that we could address immediately to address that issue.
Thank you. John?
Sure, thank you. While additional funding is definitely needed, there's probably some other things we can do. I've heard that from several students that the kids are using outdated textbooks, and sometimes they even have to share these books so they can't take them home. Now, I know personally of a student that's on my soccer team I coach that he has ADHD, but yet he tests so high that he can't get any services, so he has to be in this large classroom where they have to share the textbooks. They can't take them home. He can't get his work done. He can't get special attention because he's in this large classroom. So that's a real problem. He can't get his work done. He has to just can't get it done. So part of the problem with that is the high cost of these textbooks. I think we need a 21st century solution for this problem. I think maybe we should be buying some tablets and getting some software loaded on there. And as we know, textbooks can become outdated real quickly. With software, that's not such a problem. We can get that software updated. And these tablets, if they have tablets, they could have all their classes on this one tablet. They won't be lugging around 2 or 3 or 4 big heavy textbooks. Also, the beauty of this would, or another benefit of this would be that it would level the playing field. Because I know that when I've been in the library, I've seen students in there that are having to do their work there in the library because they don't have a device at home.
Thank you, John. Jake?
District 30 has a wide range of school districts. Sapulpa, very large. Bixby, very large. Even though the actual school of Bixby is not included in the district, much of the rural community is. So it does affect Bixby schools. But then you look at Lone Star, Kiefer, Mounds, and Liberty Mounds. What's right for Bixby and Sapulpa is not going to be right for Mounds and Kiefer. It's two different sizes of school. Now that has to be overcome with compromise somehow. Like Mr. Threadgill said, I believe technology is the wave of it's not the wave of the future, it's present. It's actually the past. And our schools need to get caught up to that. I have a 9th grade daughter in Bixby, and this is the first year that Bixby Public Schools has used Chromebooks for freshmen. A school like Bixby, I would have expected that 10, 15 years ago, possibly. So we're behind the 8 ball. I support funding education fully, but truthfully. And what I mean by that is not writing a bill and on page 3 of it slipping something in there that goes to another state agency. If we're gonna...
Sorry for that.
Holy
that was the timer.
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Scared me. We didn't have a buzzer at the last floor.
They were afraid you're going to keep going.
Whoa. So my stand for education is truth and funding. I am a proponent and supporter of school administrative consolidation. I don't want to consolidate Mounds and Liberty Mounds and Kiefer into one school. That's not what my goal would be. My goal would be to cut the higher administration, combine those administration with one superintendent, possibly bringing back the county superintendents that Oklahoma used to have until the early 90s when they did away with that position. Possibly bringing back county superintendents that oversee an entire county, yet having a daily administrator on site at individual schools to oversee the daily business activity of that school. So I do support administrative consolidation, not physical school consolidation.
Thank you. I thought Jake was reading off my paper here. But I agree with him. We need to do some school administration consolidation. We need to be mindful that some of these independent districts, they like to retain their individuality. So we know what's been discussed for years in the legislature, but nothing's been done. So amazingly, 2 hours before I got these questions, I had just looked up the information on school district sizes, and there's 498 school districts on the paper I got, and over half of them, 284, have less than 500 students per district. 29 of them only have 100. When you break that down, for instance, let's look at Tulsa Public Schools. The cost of our superintendent per student is less than $6, $5.73 is what I figured. Some of these other districts, these small school districts, you're paying $1,000 per student for that superintendent. So I agree with Jake that we need to consolidate the administrative functions of some of these schools, school districts. And yeah, that's it.
Mark, can I say one more thing?
Why not?
Before you go,
Jam on.
Bixby's former superintendent ranks 13th in the state as his overall benefit package, yet the school district ranks 21st. Seems to me like 13th and 21st needs to be, 13th needs to come to 21st. Though his total benefit package is out of scale with where the Bixby Public School System ranks in the state. I'd like to see all those equaled up. Sorry, Mark.
Jake, you're all right. I'm going to echo a lot of what these gentlemen said. I do support it overall, I do, but I want to spend my time and I want to give you guys some information just from the Capitol and some of the discussions that we've had, that if we're going to have consolidation, and I do think that it's coming, it's going to take a long time. I mean, for goodness sakes, the teacher pay raise and the package that we put together to fund education, the pay raise took 18 months to get that done. Consolidation is going to take that amount of time too. The main issues that we're facing is it's not really a Republican or a Democrat issue, it's an urban versus rural. Mr. Rowland mentioned that, and that what is good for Kiefer and Mounds is probably not good for Bixby and good for Sapulpa. You know, Glenpool is right there in the middle. So that's a lot of the issues that we're facing. Let's take Creek County, for instance. That's where, we all have Creek County ties, but right. Sapulpa is the county seat there, the largest district. And a lot of these school systems are the heartbeat of those communities. So the Bristows, the Manfords, the Kiefers, the Kellyvilles, the Oiltons. And the notion of local control is very, very important to those districts. And their school boards, their governing bodies are elected from the public. Those are parents, those are community leaders there that make up that. And so to find a way, because if we pass that legislation, what applies to one is going to have to apply to all. And to find a solution that not just the House of Representatives can agree on, but the Senate can also agree on, and the governor can also sign. That's a very, very heavy lift, given that we have 500 districts. But I do support it, but please just give us some time to get it done. Well, I'm a firm no, mainly because I voted for House Bill 1010X. That's what with the teacher pay raise funding, that's where it came from. And again, it took us 18 months to get there. It passed under the rules of State Question 640. It was something that I think statewide the people wanted us to do. 2 years ago, I was very much in the same situation, running in a Republican-only primary. So of course, during the campaign, you're on Republican doorsteps, and they said two things: fix the budget and give teachers a raise. And of course, we had 2 special sessions to get it right, and we were in concurrently with this session here. And so I had the opportunity to come back to the district and say, hey, we're in this special session in the fall, and we're in this in the winter. Here's the things that we're discussing, and in order to pay for this pay raise, we're going to have to raise a few taxes. And Republicans across District 30 were very much in support of that. They said, Mark, nobody likes taxes, but we're tired of being last in everything. And we want you to give teachers a raise. So if you're going to raise some taxes, just raise taxes on big oil and gas too. And something you should know about House Bill 1010XX, the burden that it puts on the average Oklahoma taxpayer is $17 a year in the fuel tax. If you're a non-smoker. If you are a smoker and you don't want to incur that cost, TSET has money set aside for smoking cessation. You can call 1-800-QUIT-NOW, and they have several programs that can get you tobacco-free. So I'm a no.
Well, I'd certainly vote against the repeal and campaign against it also. Our teachers deserve better than we've been providing them. And it's not new here in Oklahoma. As I mentioned, my dad was a school teacher. I lived it. He had to be a carpenter, roofer, sheetrocker, painter, whatever he could do to make some money to provide for his 5 boys. So I certainly can empathize with these teachers. My granddaughter, whenever she started kindergarten, they needed somebody to come up there and be a mentor to a child that had a little problem. So before I know it, I'm up there 5 days a week, and it was the most wonderful experience I've ever had. The sad part about it was I could see how the teachers were struggling. I could see how the classrooms didn't have what they needed. I spent a ton of my money providing for these teachers just on supplies that they needed. So we need to not only give the teachers a pay raise, but we've got to provide more funds to the classroom. It's often said that you get what you pay for. Providing better teacher salary are going to retain good teachers. It's going to incentivize people to go into the profession, and we're going to stop losing our teachers of the year to Texas. So during the teachers walkout, I should mention that I've provided water to them along the way and snacks, and I was there in Oklahoma City whenever they arrived, and their commitment and the support that was shown to them is what encouraged me to run for office. Thank you.
When it comes to this veto petition that they're pushing, I oppose it. It totally throws a wrench in everything that Mr. Lawson and his fellow legislators have done in the past 2 years. When it comes to next year's contract negotiation for teachers, that pay raise will not be there because it will not be able to be voted on until November by the citizens. So how do you handle contract negotiations for 18-19 school year? Our legislator, I can't sit here and say that I've done this or I've done that like Mark can. He is the incumbent, and I will say he's done his job.
Thank you.
I can't say anything bad about Mr. Lawson. But this veto petition they have going around is probably the worst thing that could happen right now with the atmosphere and the condition that it's in surrounding education. That sign totally threw me off right there.
They told me it would.
My goal running for this position is to go to Oklahoma City, represent District 30 and the state of Oklahoma in a proper, correct manner for what's best for the district and the citizens of our state. I think right now our state is on the fence. It could go either way. I think this next legislative session is going to be a turning point in the future of our state, and I want to be part of the solution that continues down the road.
The committees that I'm on right now are Public Health, I'm on Children, Youth, and Family Services, I'm on County and Municipal Government, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Appropriations and Budget Subcommittee on Human Services. And I am very, very happy with the committees that I'm on right now. I feel like those are the 4 best committees. Given my background, a little bit of my background is I worked for 7 years in pediatrics at the Children's Hospital. I went back to college in 2005 and went for a health education degree and managed to talk myself into finishing my pre-med requirements as well. So I had a lot of experience there. Worked part-time at Youth Services of Tulsa with their Safe Place program. And in that interim, I'm past chairman of the board of Youth Services of Creek County and a Creek County CASA advocate, which CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates for Abused and Neglected Children. So last year, the 2017 year, I was the vice chairman of Children, Youth, and Family Services. And then Representative Pat Owenby from Ardmore this year announced that he was not seeking his final term, and he was the chairman of the Appropriations and Budget Subcommittee on Human Services. And in the House of Representatives, a lot of times that is one of the budgets that's often looked at first when it comes to cuts. And I went to the Speaker's office and said, Mr. Speaker, I would like to move to this committee so that I can learn as much from Representative Owenby for this final year in the 2018 year. And if things go my way in this election, I'll be appointed chairman of that committee. And I think that goes hand in hand with education. I have told this group, or the PLAC group at the events before, I see a lot of new faces here now, and even the teachers during the walkout that were there in my office, is so many, when we talk about education outcomes, there's so much that happens outside of the classroom in the school building to a lot of these children, and I'm sure that's very, very prevalent in Bixby as well. I know in Sapulpa, for instance, 75% of the kids that are enrolled are on free and reduced lunch. And some of these kids may not eat when they're outside of school. They may not know where they're going to sleep that night. They may be the 10-year-old oldest sibling that has to babysit the 8-year-old and the 6-year-old. And so math homework kind of falls down on the list of priorities for that kid. And that all falls under the umbrella of human services. So I opted to bump over to that budget. That's where my heart is. That's where my background is. And I think that we have to focus on the total child outside of the school building, outside of the classroom, if we really want to see an improved education outcome, an improved workforce, an improved economy for the state. So if I had it my way, I would stick on all those committees next year.
Mr. Carricker?
I'm not familiar with all the committees that this state has, and maybe I should be, but the one Mark mentioned, Health and Human Services, I'd be very interested in being on that committee because I'm very concerned about the health of the citizens in this state. I'm not for sure if there's a committee on the environment, but to me the environment ties into the health of our citizens. Whenever we're polluting the water out there, it affects us all. All waters are connected in this state. There's a nexus. So I'd love to be on that type of committee where I could maybe have an impact on improving the situation in the state. Maybe some of you aren't aware of it, but we have a horrible problem with our Department of Environmental Quality. Not only has the education budget been slashed to the bones, but Department of Environmental Quality has had double-digit budget cuts for almost 10 years. Now, I'd have a little more sympathy for them if they hadn't sent somebody out there to my house, to my property, that told me that he didn't care if my neighbor's sewage water gets in this creek, nothing he can do about that, doesn't care about my outrageously high pollution numbers. They don't mean anything to him, they're just numbers. And he didn't care what the statute says, he's not going to follow the statute. That came from a supervisor from the Department of Environmental Quality. That is ridiculous to have a state employee come out and tell a citizen something like that and do nothing about the problem. Still to this day, my neighbors still spray their sewage water into the creek that crosses my property, and nobody in the state has done anything about it. I've talked to everybody who represents me in this nation except for Donald Trump. I've talked to everybody else face to face, and nobody, including our incumbent, has done anything to help me. Department of Environmental Quality, they did send Mr. Lawson a letter that said everything was fine out there. Mr. Lawson, all he had to do to know different than that was meet his commitment to come out to my house on March 31st, 2017 and see the actual facts of that case, to see what is actually going on out there. So, yeah, we need to increase our budgets to some of these agencies too, but we also need accountability from these agencies when it comes to us citizens.
Mr. Rowland?
As you can see if you read my bio, I own a small landscape service, tree trimming, hardscapes. That's what I do. I started that in 2002. I like to think I'm a pretty savvy business person with the success I've had over the past 16 years. So as outside of education, I would like to venture into the Department of Commerce within the state on building small businesses. And when I say small businesses, I mean the rural folks out here that own a roofing company or a plumbing company that, you know, they gross, let's just say $250,000 or less a year, and see what incentives we can give them to help them grow their business instead of putting regulations to hold them back and be successful. Another area I would like to venture into is the wildlife department, forestry and wildlife area. I have two boys that love to fish. We have a pond in the backyard and I have to fish almost daily because they want to go fish and they love being outside in that activity. So that would be an area that I would want to venture into. Wildlife department, parks and rec across the state. You know, some of our parks on state lakes are inoperable because we don't have the funds to keep them up. And so the public can't use park areas when they're not maintained by the proper departments. I currently coach youth sports in Bixby. So along with Mr. Lawson, I would like to be involved in youth services. I believe sports play a huge role in a child's life. Their development socially, their development competitively for the rest of their life. I believe a lot of that is molded in these young ages, you know, between 6 and 12, 13. When I've had my kids play every sport possible. I've never told them no to an activity because I want them to experience everything so that they can make the decision when they're old enough to focus on one thing. At least they'll have been exposed to everything possible. You want to go first?
Yeah, let's go to reverse.
I do support the lowering of what they call the supermajority, the state question 640. I believe the supermajority, 75%, makes it extremely, extremely difficult for our state legislature to pass revenue bills. What it does is it takes, right now the Republicans are the majority, well, they have to compromise to get the Democratic support for legislation. Well, when that happens, the Democrats want something on the back pages of said bill, and so you have to compromise your bill to get the support that you need to pass it, being at 75%. Most states across the country are 60 or 65%. So yes, I do support repeal of the supermajority.
Well, would it be down to 50-50?
No, I believe it would go down to 60, possibly 65.
Why not 50-50?
Why not 25? I mean,
Well, I know, but
yeah.
I mean,
Hold on, hold
wouldn't that
on.
make it fair?
We've got to stick with the format that we said. Okay. Do you need another note card?
Yeah, sure, I oppose that. I think we should repeal that supermajority, 75%. We can see what kind of impact it's had on this state. It's been devastating. We haven't been able to get hardly anything done, especially on the revenue side. So yeah, we need to lower that. I think a simple majority would be wrong. I would but I would rather have something like 2/3, 66%, 67%. So I think it's self-evident, the impact that 75% supermajority has had on the state.
Well, if you're a fan of 640, you can say that it worked. We were able to reach that threshold. I did support measures in the House of Representatives this past year to send State Question 640 back to the ballot. And we tried that a few different ways. We tried it with a 60%, which is what's used in a lot of school bond elections, but also a 2/3, which is 68 votes in the House of Representatives. Because currently, as it is, it's easier to override a governor's veto than it is to raise revenue. And the slippery slope that happens, though, because State Question 640 was enacted by a vote of the people, it's very, very dangerous for the legislature to go in and this is my personal belief, to go in and undo something that the people have voted on that they want to work. Now, again, it's in the Constitution. It's also in the Constitution that we should revisit the entire Constitution every 20 years. And it's been over 20 years since 640 was voted on. We found ourselves, history kind of repeated itself with education funding and the teacher walkout again. And so we thought it was time to send that back. The whole Constitution is overdue, I think, but we wanted to send that back to the people to let them decide, and we wanted to give them those options. Unfortunately, those measures failed in the Senate, but I would support legislation again that would send that back to the people. Okay, I oppose recreational marijuana. I just a simple no on that. Medical marijuana, where there is some oversight by a physician, and that is the physician-patient relationship, I think that relationship should be protected, whether that's vaccinating your children or marijuana for certain diagnosis. Now, the issue with State Question 788, again, I feel like this is maybe information that we have at the Capitol that you may not find that on your news feed or on the nightly news. So the issue that we're having, should that pass, is the regulation of that. Insofar as if it passes, I go to the doctor, I'm prescribed marijuana, and there's a place where I can go and I can buy that. That is revenue that is generated for the state. Currently, that would fall under the Department of Health, and if the Department of Health collected those revenues, it puts at risk all of our federal funding to the Department of Health, because marijuana still at the federal level is a Schedule I drug. Other states have done this, so there is some framework out there. If it does pass, the governor will call us back into special session to address those issues. I think that the way that it's written is very loose, because that regulation is not there. So it makes me, I'm very hesitant to support that, only because it jeopardizes, again, health funding for the state of Oklahoma, and that's Medicaid dollars, which, as many of you know, I mean, there's a lot of children that are on Sooner Care. Most of the Medicaid recipients in the state of Oklahoma are children, and if it passed the way it was and there was no regulation, then all of those federal funds would be at risk.
Yeah, I support the passage of medical marijuana law. And I think we had plenty of examples out there where we could go to other states and look at their framework and see what they did and see how well that worked. We should be getting the best ideas we can from these other states where they've had it for several years. Recreational marijuana, I'm probably on the fence on that. I think we need to do some studying on these other states that have just recently passed recreational marijuana and see what problems they may be having.
I'm against recreational marijuana, 100%. I support medical marijuana with strict oversight from a medical professional. One of the current problems we have in society is the opioid epidemic. We've trusted medical professionals to oversee that, and somehow I would say, for lack of a better term, they're not doing their job properly to these people that they're prescribing opioid pain pills to. So can we trust them with medical marijuana? I support the medical marijuana, but with strict regulations and oversight, which would, as Mark said, which would be at a Department of Health level within the state. I would definitely be concerned with what Mark said about losing the federal funding at that level, but I oppose recreational, I support medical. I believe you're more, it's the state voucher is the term that they use on it. So should you pull your child out of public school and choose to put them in a private school or a charter school, the question is, should you receive that voucher from the state to help pay for that education privately? I stand firm that I would not support a voucher going for private schooling. The public school system is provided. If you choose, if your decision is to take your child out of that setting publicly, put them in a private school, then you can privately fund that education. I do not support giving vouchers to families that want to take their kids out of public school system.
Mr. Thurgood?
Would you read the question again?
Well, I kind of combined two questions. So basically, what would be your position on the use of public tax dollars in a situation for a tax credit or a voucher going to a private school?
Yeah, I fully support public education, and we whatever we do, we have to make sure that that is out there for everybody. Vouchers, I don't know if I'm in favor of that. Maybe I would be more in favor of getting some sort of a tax credit that you could adjust for somebody that would want to use private schools.
I'm a yes, but constitutionally we're required to fund public education. We're not required to fund charter schools. We're not required to fund private schools. So until we get to a point where that's taken care of, I think the priority should be public education, because every family, while there are definitely strata, some that may make use of a voucher or a credit and be able to transport their child to where that new school may be. There are some families, even if they receive that voucher, they still couldn't provide that transportation. And it's the state's obligation to provide that education to every kid. So until we get to a point where our public education system is funded the way that it needs to be funded, to where every child is getting a quality education, I think the ongoing talk of expanding vouchers or savings accounts is premature. We've got enough work to do ahead of us with public education before we expand on that. Much like State Question 640, the capital gains exemption was passed by a vote of the people in 2004. I did vote against it for several different reasons. That's one of them. If we want to exempt that, I have no problem sending that back to the vote of the people. We have very populist roots here in Oklahoma, and those roots run deep, and there's still quite a bit of that's alive and well. Furthermore, when you start talking about some of the carve-outs that were talked about, whether it's agriculture, or whether it's this, or whether it's that, eliminating that is not going to yield the returns that some of the more vociferous members of the House this past year claimed that it would. Number one, if you carve out the agriculture piece of that eliminates a lot of the capital gains exemption, people that make use of that exemption. Furthermore, if you're talking about other stocks, usually it's the people where that money, the most of the money would come from, was people that have enough resources to simply start investing out of state, where they can claim that exemption. So to insinuate that removing that exemption is somehow going to fund more money into education is just false. It's a lot like the lottery. The lottery was sold, it's going to bring hundreds of millions of dollars into education, and then after we implement it years later, what it yields towards education is significantly less than what the public was sold on. The capital gains exemption is very much that same way. If we were to remove it, it would not yield nearly what some members of the House of Representatives claims that it would.
Mr. Jacob?
Sure. I'm not going to pretend like I'm knowledgeable as Mr. Lawson is on tax, capital gains tax exemption. But I am in favor of keeping that exemption right now because I think it does encourage investment. So again, that's about my extent of my knowledge on that.
They keep talking about capital gains exemption repeal. I think a better term that could be used is reduction. I don't believe we need to repeal the entire capital gains. I believe it's 250,000 currently. I believe a reduction could be necessary. I would not support a full repeal of the exemption. I would entertain and love to discuss a reduction in the exemption, the maximum amount that's allowed for that exemption.
State question 640.
State question 640.
I agree.
Agree.
Yeah, state question 640 and speak from a call.
Yep. So then, it's just a little bit of a follow-up. I already know the answer to this. In your opinion, is there a single way to pay for an increase in the education budget? So if that was the largest roadblock, is there a way? What would be the best way to find an increase for education funding?
This is, if you guys have something prepared, I'm trying to give you some time.
I gotta find my
I have the
preparation
luxury
notes here.
of doing this for the last 18 months, but I think the best way for that, number one is the performance audits that we passed in 2017. I think when the Department of Education is up, that audit will tell us a lot. There are some that are of the mindset that when you audit something, you're going to find all this waste, fraud, and abuse, but I remind them that there's two sides to that coin. The audit could also show that you're severely underfunding education. And so, but the audit provides that data. I think the biggest area where we could free up some money, and if this is to teacher pay raise or to classroom, but just the education budget in general, is going to be to shop around to see if we can find someone to provide health insurance to our teachers, the flex benefit or the health choice. We're paying just an exorbitant amount. Now, I'm not saying we're getting rid of benefits. Please don't take that away. But the amount that the state is spending, that is part of the cost that goes towards the Department of Education, the education budget. I think if we can find something like the other state employees, the benefits that they receive, a comparable package to what they're receiving now, because it is a benefit that they earn and they need. If we could save, arbitrarily $250 million a year because we find something much more affordable that fits those needs, that's money that the legislature and just the budget process is earmarked for education. We could keep it there and put it towards either classroom or teacher pay. I think that's my opinion, of course, that's probably the pot of money that's the biggest out there.
Did you say the single?
Yeah, just if you had one recommendation, your top recommendation.
Well, I have two top recommendations.
Okay, one or two.
So, I think we need to increase the gross production tax for the, remove that discount period that they have, move it to at least 6%, if not 7%. And this is certainly stepping outside the box of being a Republican, but believe that we should repeal some of those tax cuts that we had. Raise the income tax on people making $200,000 a year up to 6%, and if they're making $400,000 a year, return it to 7%. There's a state that did this, and if you read the Tulsa World and the letters to the editor, I sent in a letter to them congratulating Kansas for doing just that. They had to also override the government, Brownback, I believe his name, had to override the government's veto to get that done. So Kansas got it. They repealed their last tax cut, and they funded education. So I think that's something we could do in this state.
Wasn't that court mandated though in Kansas?
Was what court mandated?
The the funding of education. The legislature didn't lead, it was court mandated.
The Kansas Supreme Court did rule that their budget did not meet they ruled their budget unconstitutional because it did not adequately fund education for the state. Oklahoma's constitution, unfortunately, does not contain that provision. So, but yes, that's where it came from, that they were mandated by the courts to increase that, and they had to come up with a way to do it. So.
With what Damon just said, let's not get the Oklahoma Supreme Court involved in our legislation. Let's find a solution somehow, some way. Mr. Threadgill speaks on increasing the GPT. I'll say I'm not a supporter of increasing it. I'm a supporter of equalizing it across the state. I've spoken with small oil men in Kiefer, Mounds, and Glenpool. They pay a higher GPT than what I'll call the big guys do in western Oklahoma. How is that field? You're taking more from the little guy that's trying to make a living and produce for our state, but you're given a bigger cut over here. And I'll use a generic name. I'll just use Chesapeake as a name, not to get on any bandwagon against them, but that's the name most people know across the state. How Dexon, a local Kiefer company, and Chesapeake, how are they not paying equal GPT? I don't think we need to increase it. I think we need to get everybody on an equal playing field across the state. That would make a huge difference in the revenue that the state produces. Last night I met with a Tulsa fireman and his family, and we were speaking on retirement funds, and I believe he said it was maybe 2012. The firefighters union did not pass. The state wanted to take over their retirement fund. They voted to keep it privatized and control it themselves. An option may be to let, when it comes to the teacher health care, to turn that over to the private teacher associations and take that responsibility away from the state. I think it's a possible solution, so that oversight of health care, retirement, such things as that, they oversee it themselves. So what choices are made are within their group. It's not made at a state capital level. One topic we have not talked about, and if you listen to the sports animal here in Tulsa, is legalized sports gambling. That was just went through the U.S. Supreme Court. That question, or that topic, will be a very hot topic in the next legislative session. Whether we want to sit here and admit it or not, gambling is going on very, very heavily. Illegal gambling. I talked to an associate of mine, and his concern is across the state we have tribal casinos in small communities outside of the Hard Rock and Osage and River Spirit. We have these little casinos in small communities. You can only drain a local community's economy so much in the form of gambling, because right now, private gambling, you can gamble on credit. Your bookie will let you gamble on credit. Well, you're either going to pay him back financially, or you're going to pay him back in some form of retribution down the road if you don't pay. If legalized sports gambling passes, then you can only gamble what you have, because it's cash up front. So you can't gamble on credit. But once a gambler, just like opioids, any drug, it's an addiction. Once you get behind, you will chase, and you're going to get further and further and further and further behind. I'm of the opinion that legalized gambling could be very detrimental to society as a whole, and economically and financially.
Okay.
And I'm Jake Rowland. Sorry, I didn't really give a closing statement. I bring up another topic. I'm Jake Rowland. House District 30. I would appreciate everyone's support. I appreciate each and every one of you coming out tonight. Thank you to Jenks Schools for hosting this, and the camera girl here, and the time card girls, and Mr. Hudson. Thank you, guys.
Mr. Thurgood?
Yes, thanks everyone for coming out here tonight. We know that this is important to you. It's important to us too. Should be important to all Oklahomans. I hope by now you know how I feel about education. We're going to fund education no matter what it takes. I think you also know how I feel about the environment. We need to protect our environment, and that is not happening in this state, just like funding for education is not happening. We need a change in the legislature up there. How do we get in this mess? Well, we're told we're going to do these tax cuts, and that's going to generate more growth. It's going to stimulate growth, and it's going to generate more revenue. Did that happen? No, that didn't happen. Of course not. So now they're making up for the shortfall by cutting state agencies. Elect me to the State House so I can get this state back on solid revenue footing and start requiring accountability from all of our state agencies to us citizens. My name is Chuck Threadgill. I'm running for House District 30.
Mr. Lawson?
Thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure to sit here and visit with you guys and answer your questions. I've had an extreme privilege to serve as your representative for the last 2 years. Just a few little fun facts of what we were able to do in the first 2 years that I think are the highlights of those last 18 months is out of the gate, we did pass the performance audit bill to audit the top 20 appropriated agencies for the accountability to the taxpayer. That's going to provide the data we need to really know where we're performing well and where we can improve as far as funding goes across all of state government. Secondarily, we've got the first no-cut budget in the state since 2013. I'm really proud of that. We've given teachers a pay raise that they haven't had in 11 years. Again, 2 years ago, the priorities of the Republicans in this House district were fix the budget and give teachers a raise. So that's what I went down, and that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. Yes, there's still a lot of work to do, but I would like to think that my votes show where I stand, that I support public education, I support our teachers, I support funding the core services of government, and I would love nothing more than to go down and be your representative again for the next 2 years. Again, thanks for being here. Appreciate your support, appreciate your vote. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys and taking the time, and New Year's.